And happy Monday, January 30th, 2023, and welcome to this rainy day in Atlanta edition of what I like to call the Isolation Cabin. I'm your host, Kurt Cadet, feeling very isolated with this really ugly weather right now. But with that aside, I'm going to be breaking you off with my thoughts and expertise on being isolated, living an isolated life, and one of the few things you can do to resolve those issues. So today I want to talk about the type of isolation that deals with pushing people away and constantly burning bridges. Throughout my life, I've had multiple friends and multiple family members who have unfortunately fit this description. And I've got to tell you, from seeing the way their lives turned out firsthand with my own eyes, it is not a road that you want to go down. Not even a little bit. Because look, there's one thing about being isolated because you lost a loved one and you don't feel like talking to anybody and you just don't even feel like going outside. I can get that, at least for a certain period amount of time. But when you isolate yourself by pushing people away, having constant falling outs with everybody you're close with, and your response is simply that everybody else is the problem and not you, then in all honesty, you have a problem. And if you want to know what that problem is, you really need to look in the mirror. Because you can have a falling out with one person, two people, etc. But when you're having constant falling outs with everybody in your life, whether it's a friend, whether it's a family member, and it's always their fault and none of it is ever your fault, and you're always the victim, you're always the one getting wronged by everybody, to be perfectly honest, you're just fucking yourself by behaving that way. And you're ruining relationships that are good, that are sacred, that are valuable, simply just because you can't get out of your own way. And when you're stuck in your own way to that degree, where you're not even willing to apologize or at least willing to own up some form of responsibility for your part that you may have played in all these falling outs, then you're not going to like where you end up in life. Yeah, because it's ugly, unhappy, miserable, shitty ass road to travel down. And I know I've talked about this before, that I've lived my isolated life at one time or another, and I wasn't a fan of it looking back at it now. But I can't really recall any of those times where I was going through that, where I cut people off and burned bridges and had constant falling outs with people. I can at least say that I was never that kind of person. Because there's probably no form of self-sabotage that is worse than when you push people that love you and that you deep down love back away from you, and do things to turn them off, and do things to make them resent you, and more than anything, just do things to make them not want to fuck with you anymore. And it sucks. And hey, sometimes people do us wrong, and sometimes people do fuck us over. And sometimes people, even if they are family and even if we have known them for years, maybe they deserve to be cut off. I get that. But when it's a constant thing, when it's something that is happening on a very regular basis, and it always seems to be the fault of the other party, then you're guilty of this behavior. But sadly, a lot of the people who are guilty of this behavior, instead of doing something to fix it, instead of trying to find some kind of understanding of it, they just put all the blame on everybody else. Everybody else fucked me over. Everybody else did me wrong. Everybody else is an asshole. Everybody else is toxic. Everybody else is crazy. The one thing you fail to understand, if you're that kind of person, is that the common denominator in all those scenarios is you. I'm not saying they're all your fault. I'm not saying they weren't scenarios where you were legit fucked over by someone you loved. But with that amount of falling outs with people and that amount of bad blood with multiple different people that you once had good relationships with, chances are you played a role in that too. And if you can't own up to that role that you may have played in those scenarios and admit some kind of fault and some kind of guilt in those scenarios, then I honestly can't respect you. And chances are you probably don't respect yourself either. Yeah, because it's immature and childish and it doesn't do you any good. Yeah, because that isolated life, while it's good to be independent, while it's good to be self-reliant, eventually everybody needs somebody. And when you burn those bridges of all those people you might need at some point, who are you going to call when that time comes that you need somebody? The worst kind of reputation you could ever have, whether you go into a job, whether you go into a relationship or what have you, is to have the reputation of somebody who's hard to get along with, who burns bridges, and who is just a royal pain in the ass. Yeah, because the more you behave that way, the more that you have these kind of falling outs with people, chances are after a while, nobody's going to want to be around you. And if your goal by behaving the way you behaved was to not have other people want to fuck with you or not have any friends or family that want to have anything to do with you, then mission accomplished. I really hope you're proud of yourself. I'll never understand for the life of me how anybody would live that way and call it happiness and call themselves centered and at peace. It's shit is what it is. Major league shit. And sometimes, yeah, some people do deserve to be cut off because they do affect our mental health and affect our inner peace. And that's fine. Cut those people off, kick their ass out the door, and never look back. But also at the same time, whether it's a friend, whether it's a family member, spouse, what have you, at one point or another, whether intentionally or unintentionally, they will end up hurting you or doing something to upset you. Granted, certain things are deal breakers, but for any good, strong, and healthy relationship to last, you have to work through a lot of those rough patches and instances where they upset you and do wrong by you. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying that they always deserve your forgiveness. But healthy relationships and ones that last a long time, a big component of that is forgiveness. And when you cut people off over the smallest indiscretion or over one disagreement or over one incident and aren't even willing to at least talk it out, then you're not going to have a shot at having any real healthy relationships that are worth holding on to and worth lasting. If you keep behaving that way, if you keep constantly cutting people off without any explanation, without any freaking discussion about it, then you're going to live a very lonely life. And I'm telling you, it's going to suck big time. Because there's one thing when you're isolated because you moved to a new town and you don't know anyone, or if you're going through depression or going through a hard time and things along those lines. Those forms of isolation you don't have any control over. But when it's self-isolation to the degree where you cause it yourself and you're the reason why other people don't want to be around you, and you even refuse to accept responsibility for that, you're your own worst enemy. And you're digging yourself a hole that will take a lot to dig yourself out of. Because you have to understand that sometimes the issue, the problem, is you. And there's nothing wrong with admitting that. There's nothing wrong with opening up and saying, hey, I screwed up. Hey, I was wrong. Hey, I shouldn't have done that. And just apologizing for it. I don't know where this whole idea came from, but there is zero shame in owning up to your fuck-ups and apologizing and trying to do right by them. Instead of just acting like you're always right, acting like you know everything, acting like you always do the right thing all the time. Nothing's ever your fault. You never do anything wrong. You're always the victim. You're always the one getting fucked over. Yo, get the fuck over yourself. Because if you're that kind of person, then honestly, you're a little bitch. Because that's one thing that will kill relationships, regardless, is somebody who never admits when they're wrong. And instead of doing that, they'd rather just burn bridges and not have any of these people in their life anymore. Because it's hard out here, man. We all have shit that we deal with on a regular basis. We all have shit that brings us down. We all have shit that can be overwhelming. But eventually we need to lean on someone. And there's nothing wrong with leaning on someone when you're going through a hard time. Because when you act fake tough and act like you don't need anyone, you're not fooling nobody. It's just so sad that when you're that obsessed with being right, when you're that obsessed with proving a point, that you're willing to ruin relationships, good relationships over it. What a shame. What a damn shame, and what a disappointment. And then you wonder why your life is the way it is several years later, why you can't get a significant other, why you don't have any friends, why you're all by yourself. It's like, yo, you asked for this. Your behavior, your demeanor, your attitude, your lack of accountability for your own shit. And you want to wonder why you're all alone? Because this form of self-isolation is the one form where you can't blame anybody else for it. You can't blame a death in the family. You can't blame an incident that happened in your past. The only person you can blame for this type of shit is yourself. Because like I said before, if you have that many falling outs with people and that many relationships that are ruined with others, you're the common denominator in all those scenarios. And at one point or another, you screwed up. And if you admit to screwing up, instead of cutting off that person or just saying you don't want to have anything to do with them anymore, then it's the first step in the right direction. Because like I said before, that's what relationships, healthy relationships, are all about, is being accountable, holding yourself accountable when you mess up, and saying, I apologize, I was wrong, I will try to do better next time. It's that simple, guys. It is that simple. It's one sentence, and it will save you so much stress and so much bullshit. Because at the end of the day, none of us are right all the time. None of us get it right all the time. One point or another, whether you mean to or you don't mean to, you're going to screw up. And sometimes you may screw up by hurting somebody you love. And if you do, just own up to it. It's not that fucking hard. Just own up to it every now and then and just say, hey, I didn't handle myself the best way in this scenario. And I need to fix that shit. Because none of us are perfect. And if you think you're perfect, you're fucking fooling yourself. And you're not fooling any of us by any stretch. Yeah, because an isolated life to that degree, you're just asking for a slow and painful death. Yeah, pushing people away, especially people who genuinely love you and genuinely care about you, it's not right. It's just not right. Unless they really did something to you that is unforgivable, just pushing them away for the sake of pushing them away because you don't want to deal with people, or you just don't want to apologize for maybe something that you did wrong. Man, it's shit. And I don't know what to tell you if you choose to just keep going down this path and never own up to the things you did wrong. Because when you're that kind of person, it's clear that you just don't want to help yourself. That you want to stay the victim, that you want to stay in this little small world that you live in, all by yourself at that. That shit sounds like zero fun. Zero fun. Because if there's anything that COVID bullshit taught us for that period of time where we all had to stay at home without any access to the outside world, is that that's not a sustainable life That's not a healthy life. That's not a fruitful, positive, happy life. And while that scenario, that was beyond our control, it's another thing when you put yourself in that scenario and choose to stay there. Because I'm here to tell you, from someone who's been self-isolated to a degree and who's seen friends and family go down this road as well, it is not a happy ending. Because the only place you will end up with that kind of lifestyle and that kind of attitude is old and alone. And there's probably no other fate worse than that. So if you're serious about not living that kind of life, not being that kind of person, and not ruining relationships that are good, take responsibility. If you do wrong by someone, if you guys have an argument, take responsibility and also practice forgiveness. The forgiveness part I know is hard because there are certain acts that are unforgivable, but there are certain acts that are legit an accident, or maybe legit the other person just didn't know. But if you don't talk to them about it, you don't communicate with them about it, then what the hell are they supposed to do? If just over one disagreement or one minor incident, you're just going to cut the person off and never talk to them again, that's like the most immature little bitch shit a person can do, honestly. It really is. So you need to shed that little bitchness, step up, and either take accountability when you know you messed up and apologize, or if somebody did wrong by you and it's something that you can communicate and talk through and eventually forgive them for, then do that shit. Don't ruin good relationships. Don't push people away over petty bullshit that probably won't even matter 5 minutes later. Shit is for the birds. Because I'm telling you, if you're really serious about saving yourself and you're really serious about not growing up old and alone and miserable, then you can't be a person who constantly burns bridges and pushes people away and isolates themselves by that way. So I'm telling you, if you are this type of person and you know deep down that it's not serving you, it's not doing you well, and you're unhappy being in that predicament, then change it. Because there's a difference between being put in a shitty situation and choosing to stay there. So make sure you make the right choice. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this discussion today about the self-isolation that comes from pushing people away and burning bridges. If you want to communicate with me or talk to me some more outside of this podcast, you can follow me on all my social media pages, my Facebook and my Instagram. They're both Kurt Cadet, my first and last name. So you can follow me there on any of those pages. Also leave comments on the podcast and let me know what you like and don't like about it, and possibly other discussions we can have in the future. And this has been another edition of the Isolation Cabin. I am Kurt Cadet, your host, and I will see you guys next week. Take care.